Breaking free from habits, a path to transformation. You've tried to change 1,000 times, yet you're still trapped in the same habits that steal your time, energy, and dreams. This book isn't meant to entertain you. It's meant to confront you, because you have no more excuses. Here, you'll understand that your laziness isn't your identity. It's just a program that can be broken. You'll discover how to eliminate the guilt of procrastination and start moving forward even when you don't feel like it. You don't need motivation. You need decision. And if you dare to read this as if your life depends on it, you will awaken. Today, your transformation begins, 1% at a time. 1. The habit that's stealing your life. Sometimes you don't realize you're dying while living. Not because your heart has stopped beating, but because your soul silently surrenders day after day, not with a shout, not with drama. It surrenders with a postponed promise, with a "I'll do it later," with a "tomorrow I'll start" that never comes. I lived years like that, burying every one of my dreams under the warm blanket of procrastination. I thought time was patient, that life would wait for me to feel ready. But what I didn't know was that every decision I avoided, every action I delayed, was being filed by my mind as an order, "I am not capable," and that, sooner or later, becomes your identity. One afternoon, I was alone in the kitchen, staring at a cold cup of coffee I'd forgotten to finish, with a pile of papers beside it, half-written ideas, and a bunch of dreams turned into voice notes I never listened to again. And it was there, between the silence and the disappointment, that I understood it wasn't exhaustion holding me back. It was fear, the fear of failing, of starting and not finishing, of discovering that maybe I didn't have what it takes. Has that happened to you? Have you felt that weight of knowing you could do something great, but the idea of not knowing how or if it's worth it suffocates you? There's a subtle poison disguised as calm, procrastination, that little voice that says, "Take it easy. It's not the moment yet." First, you need to be prepared when you have more energy, more time, more resources. Lie. And I say it with my voice trembling from the years lost believing it. Because, as Gill said, men fail not from lack of talent, but from lack of persistent decision. And nobody teaches you to decide for yourself. Nobody tells you that this minimal impulse, that small action you're ashamed of for seeming silly, is actually the beginning of your freedom. I used to think I needed motivation to start. I was wrong. You don't need motivation. You need the shame of continuing to be who you don't want to be. You need to exhaust your excuses, because there comes a point where you can't keep lying to yourself. There are no more videos, more books, more advice. It's just you and the habit that's stealing your life. And you know it. It's not ignorance, it's self-abandonment. I began to heal the day I stopped looking for inspiration to move, and I moved even though I felt nothing. Sometimes I wrote just one line. Sometimes I just opened the document and closed it. But I wasn't doing it for the result. I was doing it because my identity was tired of being that of a dreamer who never executes. And like someone dragging chains, one day I wrote a page, then two. Then an idea transformed into a project, and fear, though it didn't leave, learned to walk behind, no longer in front. I understood. The first step isn't to write the book, or start the business, or have the perfect body. The first step is to teach your mind that you obey your soul, not your comfort. Real growth begins when you do what you promise to do, even if you don't feel like it, even if no one applauds you, even if no one sees you. Because in that intimacy with yourself, your new identity is forged, one that no longer negotiates with excuses, one that begins to look different in the mirror. I once read that great individuals are not built in the euphoria of applause, but in the silence of discipline. And I repeated it so many times that today I believe it more than any religion. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that extraordinary results don't come from talent, but from the daily repetition of what others call boring. And that's where your freedom begins. Not when you do something grand, but when you do what you said you'd do, even if it's minimal. Do you want to change your life? Start by changing your relationship with your word. Every time you say, "I'll do it tomorrow," and you don't, you're not just losing time. You're teaching your subconscious that your word has no value. And if you don't believe yourself, who will? How will you build trust if you break every commitment to yourself? The habit of procrastinating is betrayal disguised as rest, and it's not healed with more theory. It's healed with small actions repeated every day until your mind understands that you are in charge now. Napoleon Hill spoke of decision as the bridge between desire and achievement, but not just any decision. One that isn't negotiated with the emotion of the day, one that persists even when you don't see results. And that was the hardest thing to learn, to keep moving forward without guarantees. Because true change doesn't come with applause. It comes with doubts, with long nights, with days when everything in you screams to quit. And you keep going anyway, not because it's easy, but because you no longer want to be who you were. Life doesn't steal anything from you. You are the one who robs yourself when you allow fear to govern your agenda, when you let laziness have more power than your desire, when you accept less than you know you deserve. Procrastination isn't just postponing tasks. It's postponing your evolution. It's looking at your reflection every night and feeling like you're still the same person who says someday. It's living a life of plans that only exist in your head, never in your reality. And believe me, that kills you slower than any disease. But there's a path. It's not magical, it's not pretty, but it's real. It's called consistency. It's called 1%. You don't need to change your entire life today. You just need to do something small that brings you closer to who you want to be. Do you want to write? Write one line. Do you want to start a business? Move one idea. Do you want to heal? Talk to yourself. The small isn't insignificant. It's the language the mind understands when it doesn't yet trust you. But if you repeat it, it starts to believe. And when the mind believes, everything changes. It's not about big achievements. It's about regaining your internal dignity, being able to look in the mirror and say, today I was consistent with what I want. And that, though it seems small, is everything. Because once you reclaim your word, you reclaim your power. And when you have power over yourself, no one can stop you. This chapter isn't to inform you. It's to make you tired of betraying yourself even one more day. To make you rise, not with hatred, but with hunger. Hunger for self-respect. Hunger to leave a mark. Hunger not to die with your talents dormant. Let your routine be your revolution. Let every minute count as revenge against laziness, against fear, against everything that once made you feel incapable. 2, you're not lazy. You're programmed to fail. It's not laziness. It never was. Even if you've said it 1,000 times, even if you believed it when you compared yourself to others who seemed to have more energy, more willpower, more determination, even if you felt ashamed of yourself for not being able to wake up early, for not finishing what you start, for not being consistent in what you love, it's not laziness. It's programming. An invisible chain made of ideas that aren't yours, beliefs you inherited without questioning, and habits sown in you before you had your own voice. No one is born giving up. We are taught to give up subtly. Don't get your hopes up too much. That's not for you. Be realistic. It's too late to change. And instead of rebelling, we swallow those words as truths, unaware that with each phrase, we are molding our mental cage. As that man who understood the mind like few others said, first the thought is formed, then the habit, then the character, and with it, your destiny. And you are now repeating patterns you didn't choose. You avoid effort not because you are weak, but because you are conditioned to avoid pain. And that's what hurts, not knowing how to change it. Feeling trapped in a version of yourself that you know isn't the final one, but also not knowing how to escape. I also thought I was lazy. I was called that for so long that I started to find myself by it. Every time I abandoned something, I reinforced the belief. Every time I started strong and then faded halfway, I'd say, see, you're not cut out for this. And without realizing it, I was programming my brain to give up faster and faster. I became an expert at quitting, and I hated myself for it, until I discovered that hating myself was part of the same system. Because if you believe you are broken, you don't fight. If you believe you are lazy by nature, you don't question yourself. You just resign yourself. But something in me resisted accepting that narrative. There were days, few, when that inner voice screamed from the depths, you are not this. You were not born to live small. And in those moments, I remembered Hill's words about autosuggestion, that the mind accepts any idea you repeat with enough emotion. That's how I understood I wasn't failing from lack of strength, but from excessive mistaken programming. I was acting from a borrowed identity, from a belief system that trained me to doubt myself. But if I had been trained to fail, then I could also retrain myself to succeed. That idea changed everything. It wasn't fast, it wasn't miraculous, but it was radical. I started by questioning every thought that said I couldn't. I stopped to observe how I talk about myself, how I justified myself, how I apologize with phrases like, "I'm just too easily distracted. It's hard for me to focus. I'm not consistent." Where did I get these ideas? Who put them in my head? Why do I keep repeating them as if they were my truth? It wasn't easy, because when you've been walking with rocks in your pockets for years, you forget what lightness feels like. But that's where I started, not by changing everything, but by detecting the internal codes, reprogramming. I wrote affirmations that hurt at first because I didn't believe them. I am disciplined. I finish what I start. My mind works in my favor. They seemed like lies until they weren't. Because I understood that it's not about it being true from day one, but about making it true through repetition. Like when you learn to walk or write your name. You didn't know it, but you repeated it until you mastered it. Why would it be any different with your mind? The problem is that you wait to feel motivated before acting. And the mind doesn't work that way. First you act, then the emotion changes. The education system never taught us to train willpower, only to follow instructions. That's why we confuse routine with punishment. But routine is a secret language that tells your brain, this is important to me. If you do it every day, your mind adapts, molds itself, transforms. Today I know that I am not lazy, and neither are you. What's happening is that you are trapped in a narrative that isn't yours, and until you challenge it, you'll continue to believe that there is something broken in you. But there's nothing broken. There are only poorly written paths that need to be erased and rewritten. That's what no one tells you. Your mind is like a terrain. If you planted seeds of resignation, that's what will grow. But if you start planting discipline, even if you don't see results at first, over time your garden will be different. Do you know how it starts? By doing what you said you would do, even if it's for 5 minutes, not for the result, but because that minimum but consistent act is an act of rebellion against your old self. It's a signal, a declaration that now you choose, that you will no longer live acting from the past, that you will gradually build a mind that obeys you, that works with you, not against you. That's what truly educating the mind means. Turning it into your ally, stopping being afraid of it, understanding its mechanisms, its traps, its old responses, and redirecting it. Because you can't turn it off, but you can teach it new routes. And that, though it seems small, is the beginning of your liberation. No one is going to save you. No one is going to come and program you differently. The only one who can do it is you. But you don't have to do it all today. You just need to start. Because every repeated action is a message recorded in your subconscious. And if you do it enough, the day will come when you won't have to force yourself anymore. It will be a part of you like brushing your teeth, like breathing. Your mind will learn that you are in charge, and then everything changes. It's not about having strength. It's about understanding how the system works and using it to your advantage. It's about breaking out of automatic mode, about stopping living as if your thoughts were unappealable commands. Because if I learned anything from the greats, it's that a mind without direction destroys you. But with training, it can take you wherever you want. Every habit begins in the invisible in the programming. And today, you have the key to rewrite the code. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are on pause, and you have the power to restart. No one can take that from you anymore. 3. The perfect excuse. How your mind becomes your enemy. There was a day I don't want to forget. Not because it was important, but precisely because it was one of those days that seemed to carry no weight, leave no mark. Just another day, like so many others. I woke up late, looked at the clock, told myself I'd slept poorly, that it wasn't the right time, that I wouldn't perform today, that tomorrow would be better. I made myself coffee, watched a video, checked social media, glanced at the to-do list I'd written with such enthusiasm the night before, and once again, I lied to myself. I told myself I just needed a little more rest, that my head wasn't in it, that it was better to wait until I was more inspired, more motivated, more ready. And then it happened. My mind offered me a perfect excuse, wrapped in logic, in self-justification, in that poisonous sweetness it has when you don't want to face your truth. It's okay if you don't do it today. And I believed it. I believed it as always. But what I didn't understand then was that an untrained mind isn't your friend. It's your jailer, your silent saboteur, your accomplice in the crime of abandoning what you love. Because the most dangerous thought isn't I can't. It's I have a good reason not to. Excuses don't present themselves as lies. They dress up as common sense. They disguise themselves as protection, as self-care. And that's why they're so hard to fight, because they don't seem like enemies. They seem like refuges, but deep down, they're stealing your life. I remember reading that all progress begins when you take responsibility, without excuses. And at first, it sounded violent, unfair even, because how could I not have valid reasons? How could I not feel overwhelmed, tired, hurt? But then I understood that it's not about invalidating your pain. It's about not allowing that pain to dictate your path. It's about recognizing that, yes, it might hurt today, but I can still move, I can still advance, even if it's just one step, even if I'm trembling. Because if every pain becomes a justification for not acting, then you'll never do anything great, because there will always be something that hurts. The mind, when not aligned with your goals, specializes in negotiating with your fears. It's brilliant at convincing you that you're not ready, that it's not the moment, that tomorrow will be better. But tomorrow isn't a promise. It's a mirage, and you know it. Because how many times have you said, tomorrow, yes, and the day comes and you repeat the same story? The enemy isn't outside. It's an internal script you repeat every day, in that subtle narrative that says, I'm missing something to start. But if you wait to have everything clear to start, you'll never start. I've been my own worst saboteur, and I say it without hatred, only with truth, because I realize now, looking back, how many times I was the one who stopped myself. It wasn't a lack of time. It wasn't the environment. It was me believing I needed to be perfect to deserve to move forward. But there is no perfection, only decision. And every day without deciding, the mind gains ground. Because if you don't take control, it takes control for you, and it does so with the gentleness of a toxic mother. It takes care of you while destroying you. It embraces you while burying you. I began to transform that dynamic when I understood that every excuse had a hidden purpose, to protect me from failure, because that's what I truly feared. Not the work, not the exhaustion. I feared truly trying and discovering I wasn't enough. And that's why I had behind reasons, because as long as I didn't try, I still had the fantasy that someday I could do it. But that fantasy was also a prison, because potential without action is worthless. It's a lie that keeps you comfortable, but empty. That's when I stumbled upon an idea that changed me. The mind doesn't distinguish between what you do and what you say you will do, but it does learn. It learns from your actions. If every time you say, I'm going to start, you end up doing nothing, your mind registers it. It learns not to take you seriously, and then comes the darkest moment, when even you don't believe in yourself. Because if you don't keep your own promises, how will you trust your word? So I started with the basics, stopping lying to myself. If I wasn't going to do something, I said so. If I committed, I followed through, even if it was uncomfortable. Because I understood that freedom isn't about doing only what comes naturally to you. Freedom is about making your word law, so that what you say carries weight, so that you don't need motivation to do what you said you'd do. Because when your word has value, your identity transforms. This isn't easy, but it's possible because every excuse can be dismantled if you look in the face. Ask yourself, is what I have to do truly impossible? Or am I just afraid? Am I really tired? Or am I anesthetized by so much distraction? What would happen if I did it anyway? If I acted despite not being ready? I assure you, the answer you find there will be more transformative than any advice. Because there's nothing more powerful than discovering that you can disobey your excuses, that you can move even with them screaming in your ear. Napoleon Hill wrote that persistent action is what separates achievers from dreamers. And I would add that this action doesn't begin with strength, but with courage, with a small but rebellious act, with saying, I know I'm scared, but I'll do it anyway. Because at that moment, something breaks. The programming fractures, a new mental path opens. And every time you choose to act over justifying, that path is reinforced. Until one day, without realizing it, you no longer need to justify anything. You just do. Today, when my mind offers me an excuse, I listen, but I don't obey. I recognize it for what it is, an automatic response, not a truth, because I no longer hand over the helm. Because I understood that every minute of doubt is a thief of my purpose, and I no longer want to live robbing myself. You don't either. I know. That's why you're here. Because something within you no longer wants excuses. It wants to move forward. It wants results. It wants peace. But that peace isn't achieved by avoiding effort. It's achieved by crossing to fire, by demonstrating daily that you are stronger than your justifications, that you don't need everything to be perfect to move, that you will no longer negotiate your destiny with thoughts that only know how to delay you. You are ready, even if your mind says no, because the only thing separating you from your new life isn't what you lack. It's what you tell yourself when you believe you can't. Change that, and everything else will change. Break the cycle. Do it even when you don't feel like it. There are days when life feels like a damp weight on your chest. Days when you get up, but don't wake up. You walk, but don't advance. You breathe, but don't truly live. These are the days when every task seems like a mountain, every decision a wall, every step a threat. And the worst isn't physical exhaustion. It's the lack of desire. That treacherous feeling of not wanting to do anything. Not even what you know is good for you. Because when the mind enters its cycle of evasion, everything starts to hurt. Postponed dreams, broken commitments, desires that no longer arrive. And that's where you get lost, not from lack of ability, but from lack of movement. The first time I realized that my progress depended on acting without desire, I felt broken. Because for years I had believed I had to feel something before moving, that I needed inspiration, clarity, energy, emotional alignment. But they never came. There was always an excuse, a noise, a distraction, a feeling that made me say, not today, and that not today turned into a week, then a month, then a year. And then the habit wasn't just laziness, it was waiting. I lived waiting to feel ready, without noticing that waiting was also a form of dying. Until one day, I don't know why, I got up and did it anyway, without desire, without motivation, without strength, just out of anger, out of weariness, out of not wanting to carry the guilt of having done nothing anymore. And that day, even though the result was minimal, I felt something different. I felt respect, not pride, but respect for myself, for having obeyed myself even though everything in me cried out for a pause, for having broken, even for a few minutes, the cycle that held me captive. And I understood that was all I needed. Not great achievements, not acclaim, just a small act of rebellion against a lack of desire, an action that, however minimal, shouted, I am in charge. Because the cycle of not doing begins when you believe you need to feel good to act. But as one of the greats said, action precedes motivation. It's not the other way around. Energy is generated in movement, not in waiting. And that was one of the hardest truths to accept, because it implies that if I want to change my life, I have to do it even when I don't feel like it, even when everything in me is disconnected, even when there's no emotion, because that is discipline. And discipline isn't fed by desire. It's fed by sustained decisions, even in a vacuum. I remember reading that a disciplined mind is a powerful mind, and I didn't understand it until I lived it, until I did what I had to do while my body screamed at me to stay still. Because there, in that friction between duty and desire, character is forged. And it's not a beautiful process. It's rough, it's solitary, it's uncomfortable, but it's sacred. Because in every minute you choose to move forward without desire, you are telling your mind that it no longer rules, that you are in charge now, and that changes everything. Do it even if you don't feel like it. Because if you only move when you're motivated, you'll live in the slavery of your emotional state. You'll be a hostage to your sensations, your laziness, your fear, your anxiety, and it will seem normal to you, because that's how many live. But it's not natural to live stagnant. It's not natural for your soul to want something, and your body not to move. That's not a lack of strength. It's a lack of direction. It's a disconnect between your intention and your decision. And that is healed with action, with constant movement, with small decisions that don't negotiate with the emotional state of the day. I lived it. I was there. I told myself tomorrow so many times that I no longer knew how to tell myself today, until I stopped waiting to feel different and started acting different. The change didn't come from outside. It came from doing the things I promised to do regardless of whether I felt like it or not. And that's where my transformation began. Not in a workshop, not in a book, not in a piece of advice, but at the exact moment I did what I had to without my body asking for it. And yes, at first it's ugly. It's like swimming against the current. It's exercise when you're weak. It's writing when you have no ideas. It's speaking when you don't want to. But every act of discipline is a crack in the wall of your old identity. And with each crack, more light enters until one day, without knowing how, what used to be an effort becomes a part of you, and you no longer need to force yourself because your system has already changed, because your soul has regained control. That's the magic of doing it without desire. When you repeat enough, it becomes part of your DNA. It's no longer about motivation. It's about consistency. It's about respect, about seeing yourself fulfill what you said, about trusting your word again. Because if you don't believe yourself, who will? Do it without desire, because that makes you free. Free from waiting. Free from depending on emotional states. Free from living on pause. Free from yourself. Because there's no greater freedom than acting from decision, not from mood. And ask yourself, how much longer will you let your lack of desire dictate your destiny? How many more opportunities will you lose waiting for the right moment? What part of you are you letting die every time you say later? Break the cycle today, now, with what you have, even if it doesn't excite you, even if you don't feel fire, even if you can only take one step. Take it, because that step, small, gray, cold, is braver than any unexecuted intention, and because that step, however insignificant, is the seed of your freedom. Don't live waiting anymore. Don't believe you need to feel to act. Act, and you'll see how everything else falls into place afterward. Because you don't need more motivation. You need courage. Courage to do what you said, to prove to yourself that you can, to make action your new language. Because when your body tells you no, but you do it anyway, that's when you truly start living. 5. If you don't do it today, tomorrow will be harder. There are decisions that weigh more heavily when they aren't made. They feel light the instant you ignore them, but they become stones in your soul as the days pass. You think you're gaining time by postponing, when in reality you're losing everything: energy, clarity, self-respect. I lived years like that, believing that what I didn't do today I could do tomorrow. But what I didn't understand was that every time I avoided acting, I was strengthening the muscle of evasion, training my mind to choose the easy path. And that silent but constant training stole more from me than I'm willing to accept, because it wasn't about not having time. It was about not having direction. Today I know that every time you tell yourself later, you're planting a seed of resistance, and that seed germinates. The next day, it doesn't just cost you the same, it costs you more. Because now, in addition to the effort of doing the task, you have to carry the guilt of not having done it before. You have to deal with the inner voice that reminds you that you already failed once. And that voice, if you don't confront it, grows stronger. It becomes your judge, your shadow, your saboteur. Because time isn't just a resource, it's a test. And every day that passes without you fulfilling what you promised to do distances you not from the result, but from the version of yourself that wants to emerge. I remember a specific morning, one of many, where I sat down at my desk with every intention of making progress. I had the ideas, I had the plan, I had the moment, but I didn't have the will. I told myself I needed coffee, then a video, then to check social media for 2 minutes. Before I knew it, 3 hours had passed. 3 hours of nothing. 3 hours in which I didn't fail the world. I failed myself. And that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the next day I repeated the pattern, and then again and again. And that's how mediocrity is built. In normal days full of small excuses, in harmless decisions that become your new way of existing. But the mind can be retrained. I learned that late, but I learned it. There's a silent law that governs our behavior. The faster you act on an idea, the more power it has. And the longer you postpone it, the weaker it becomes. It's like a spark. If you use it, it can light a fire. If you ignore it, it goes out. And once it goes out, it's not the same, because your brain has already classified it as something you didn't do. And what you didn't do once is easier not to do a second time. That's the trap. So I force myself to act before thinking too much, not to wait to feel like it, not to allow the perfect moment to dictate my progress, because I discovered that perfection was just an elegant excuse for fear. I didn't want to do things wrong. I didn't want to face the possibility of failing. But as those who truly understood the human mind taught me, failure isn't in doing something wrong. It's in never doing it at all. It's in betraying yourself to protect a comfort that, deep down, no longer satisfies you. And yes, the first step was hard, not because it was complicated, but because it came with all the emotional baggage of the times I didn't take it. It came with the accumulated resistance of years of inertia. But I did it, even trembling, even doubting, even complaining. And when I did, I felt something different. I felt my word regain weight. I felt that I didn't need to do everything. I just needed a start. And that was enough to break the cycle. The secret isn't in doing everything today. It's in doing something. In showing your brain that you decide, that your word counts, that even if you failed before, today you chose differently. Because every action taken today, however minimal, is an act of healing. It's a way to regain self-respect, to tell yourself, I'm not running anymore. And yes, tomorrow will be harder if you don't act today, because your mind will remember that you gave in, that you preferred comfort, and that memory becomes embedded in your nervous system. It becomes a pattern, and patterns don't disappear on their own. They are replaced, substituted with new habits, with new decisions, with new rituals. But everything begins with an act of courage today, not tomorrow, today. And that's why, if you're reading this waiting for a sign, let me tell you there won't be a clearer one. This is the moment. This is the opportunity. This is the only place where you can change your story. In the present. Don't promise yourself you'll do better tomorrow. Promise yourself that today you're going to take the first step. Because if you don't do it today, tomorrow will be harder, and the day after tomorrow, you might not even try. Every day counts, not as a race against time, but as an opportunity to reconnect with yourself, to choose yourself again, to listen to yourself again. Because behind procrastination isn't laziness. It's disconnection. You've stopped listening to yourself. You've stopped believing in yourself. But you can come back. You can rebuild, not all at once, but with firmness, with small steps, with gentle discipline, with silent will. Today you can take the step that will save you from regret tomorrow. Don't underestimate it, because there is no act more powerful than acting when no one forces you, when no one sees you, when you could not do it and yet you do. That is integrity, that is growth, that is self-love. And if you feel it's too late, if you think you failed too much, let me tell you something that changed my life. It doesn't matter how many times you postpone it. The only thing that matters is what you decide to do now, because the present has a power that the past can never touch. If you decide to act today, you are rewriting your history. You are changing your narrative. You are giving life to a new version of yourself that doesn't live trapped in what it didn't do, but empowered by what it is doing. 6. The invisible power of 1% daily. I once heard that you don't need to take giant leaps to change your life. You just need to advance one step each day in the right direction. It sounded like a beautiful, almost poetic, but useless phrase. I didn't want to advance little. I wanted to change everything fast, to get out of chaos, pain, and mediocrity with an epic decision. I wanted to feel like my life made sense from Monday on. I wanted to transform years of procrastination with a perfect plan written in a new notebook. But what I didn't know was that this urgency was also part of the problem, that the need for immediate results is another form of sabotage, because what begins with anxiety ends in abandonment. And so, once again, I found myself broken by my own impatience until I surrendered, not to the dream, but to the illusion of changing everything at once. I surrendered to the ego that wanted applause before being consistent. I surrendered to the impulse to start strong and abandon it on the third day. And from that place of humility, I began to look elsewhere. I started observing the people I truly admired. Not those who shouted goals, but those who quietly fulfill their processes, those whom no one sees, but who one day emerge with a different life. And then I understood something so simple it seemed invisible. All of them grew 1% every day, without exceptions, without pauses, without urgency. That's how I discovered the power of 1%. I discovered it by looking in the mirror and realizing I was losing the war because I wanted to win with a single battle. I sat with my frustration, my impatience, my fallen habits, and asked myself, can I improve just a little bit today? Can I be barely 1 millimeter more disciplined than yesterday? Can I write a paragraph, do 5 push-ups, read a single page? Can I keep a small promise so my brain understands that this time is different? And I did it, not with enthusiasm, but with pain, with fear. But I did it, and the next day I did it again. And something unexpected began. The resistance started to lose strength. The monster of laziness grew smaller. The voice of the excuse weaker, because the body learns. The mind, if you train it consistently, begins to obey. As one of the masters of the mind said, repetition is the secret to all mastery. Not perfection, not intensity, but repetition. Today, I know that if I hadn't committed to that 1% daily, I would still be trapped in cycles of self-deception, because the mind loves what's big, but it transforms with what's small. And that's the mistake we make. We want to see drastic changes without making small, constant adjustments. But life doesn't change when you shout at it. It changes when you repeat it. When every day, no matter how you feel, you take a step that honors the person you want to be. And I want you to ask yourself sincerely, what are you running from when you postpone your process? What part of you needs quick results because it hasn't forgiven itself for failing before? And what would happen if, for once, you chose to build without demanding perfection from yourself? What would happen if you just focus on being a little better today? Not out of fear, but out of respect for yourself, for what you know you can achieve if you don't give up. I discovered that 1% daily doesn't just change your life. It changes your identity. Because you start to become someone who follows through, who shows up, who doesn't give up at the first hurdle, who doesn't need motivation to move. And that, even if you don't notice at first, is felt, it's transmitted, it's integrated. People start to see you differently. You see yourself differently. You no longer live waiting for a stroke of luck. You live creating your own probabilities. And that's magic, but magic with its feet on the ground. Because 1% daily isn't mediocrity, it's mastery. It's having the humility to recognize that every great change begins by being invisible, that what seems small to you today will be the foundation of something immense tomorrow. And when you start to reap results, when your life begins to change, it won't be because of an extraordinary event. It will be because you were consistent when no one forced you, when no one saw you, when you could have quit and you didn't. Today, I can say that I have grown, not because of what I achieved, but because of what I sustained. For the times I didn't want to do it, and I did it anyway. For the mornings I want to go back to bed, but I sat down to write. For the nights I want to give up, but I finished what I started. Because every time I fulfill my 1%, I reinforce a new truth, that I am capable, that I don't need to be perfect, just consistent, that every small act is an investment in my future self. And you can too. You don't need to change your life today. You just need to move a little further out of your comfort zone. You just need to give yourself the opportunity to do the minimum with excellence, to start something and not stop, to trust that, as Gill said, desire sustained by constant action becomes reality. It's not a pretty phrase. It's a law, and it's waiting for you to put into practice. Not tomorrow, today, because today is the only place where you can transform your story. And if you decide to grow 1% now, you've already won. Not because you arrived, but because you chose to keep going. Because in the end, the only difference between the one who succeeds and the one who fails isn't talent. It's discipline. It's the ability to do something small every day without giving up. That's the invisible power few understand and even fewer practice. But those who do change their destiny forever. 7. Do it uncomfortably, do it incompletely, but do it. I waited a long time for the perfect moment. I would sit with my heart full of ideas, my hands still, an excuse ready. It's not the time yet. I told myself I should wait to feel good, to have everything clear, to be sure, to have time for the tiredness, fear, anxiety, and doubt to pass. But that ideal moment never arrived, because the mind is adept at disguising its fear as wisdom, at turning perfection into an elegant trap. And I fell into the same logic-disguised prison again and again, until I understood that if I kept waiting, I would grow old dreaming of a version of myself I'd never meet, and I couldn't bear it. I remember the exact day I decided to do it anyway. I had 1,000 reasons not to act. I was tired. My environment was chaotic. I didn't feel motivated. The plan was half-baked. Doubt was breathing down my neck. But I sat down, opened my notebook, and started with trembling hands, with clumsy ideas, with the feeling of forcing something that wasn't flowing. And yet, it was one of the most powerful moments of my life, because for the first time, I moved forward without conditions. I did it uncomfortably. I did it incompletely, but I did it, and that small act gave me back something I had lost without noticing: my power. What I didn't understand before is that it's not about having everything figured out to start. It's about starting to figure things out. Because when you walk, even if you're wounded, something activates within you. Your mind stops fighting fear and starts focusing on the next step. Clarity comes by walking, not by thinking. Confidence comes by acting, not by planning. As that wise man of focused thought said, action is the antidote to fear. And I spent years paralyzed, waiting for security that only appears after you start. Never before. Today, I see it clearly. Discomfort is part of the process. And if you don't embrace it, you stagnate. Because discomfort isn't a sign of error. It's proof of growth. Do you feel strange, out of place, insecure? Good. It's because you're crossing the threshold between what you have been and what you are destined to be. No quantum leap occurs from comfort. No real change happens when everything is under control. Change is born in the midst of disorder, chaos, imperfect action. And if you can do things while the world burns within you, then no one will be able to stop you, not even yourself. And do you know what I discovered? That the things we do halfway, but with honesty, build more than the things we never start because we wait for them to be perfect. That the idea isn't to advance elegantly, but with sincerity. That if you're going to fail, fail forward. That if you're going to make mistakes, let it be while you're trying, because there's no transformation in theory. Everything that changes you happens in practice, in the real world, where it hurts, where it's difficult, where you doubt, but also where you heal. Incomplete action has more value than dream perfection, because every movement, however clumsy, tells your mind that you are no longer the same, that something in you has decided to stop waiting. And believe me, your soul notices. It begins to trust, it begins to grow, not because of the results, but because of the very act of daring. Do it uncomfortably, because if you only do it when it's easy, you'll never do it when you need it most. Do it incompletely, because if you wait to have everything ready, you'll live eternally rehearsing a play you'll never put on stage. Do it however you can, but do it, because every time you decide to act without guarantees, you're creating a new internal muscle. That is self-efficacy, the one that tells you, I can do it even if my voice trembles, even if my body aches, even if my surroundings mock me. I learned to write in the midst of pain, to get up with insomnia, to record with fear, to speak even when I doubted my ideas, because I realized that the price of doing nothing was higher than that of doing something poorly. And that freed me. It lifted the weight of perfection. It gave me permission to exist, not as an unattainable ideal, but as a being in process. And that process, even if broken, is worth more than any soulless mass of success. I also remember a phrase that struck me to the core. There are no ideal conditions, only real decisions. That's when I understood that if I kept waiting for the perfect moment, the only thing I was going to perfect was my habit of procrastinating. So I chose chaos. I chose the uncomfortable moment. And there, amidst everything that wasn't right, I started to do it. And you can too. Stop looking for intelligent-sounding excuses. You don't need to be ready. You need to be willing. You don't need more time. You need more intention. You don't need validation. You need courage. Do it as you are, with fear, with doubt, with everything to resolve. But do it, because your future isn't asking you to arrive perfect. It's begging you to start, to move, to honor your dreams with actions, not with promises. Do it today. Do it badly if necessary. But don't let your soul die waiting for the ideal day. That day doesn't exist. It never has. Only this moment exists. And if you don't take advantage of it, it becomes a silent wound that will stay with you forever, a wound that whispers every night, "You could have done it." Don't let that hurt you anymore. Let the effort hurt, not the guilt. Let the tiredness weigh on you, not the regret. Because if there's one thing I've learned from those who truly transform their lives, it's this. They do it even if it hurts, even if they lack things, even if they don't see the end. And when they least expect it, everything starts to make sense. Not because they arrived, but because they never stopped walking. Do it uncomfortably, do it incompletely, but do it because that's the only way you'll make it real. 8. The new you doesn't negotiate with excuses. One day, without fanfare or applause, I woke up tired myself. It wasn't physical exhaustion. It was an existential weariness, a weight on my soul from all the times I had lied to myself, disguising laziness as a pause. Fear is common sense. Evasion is strategy. I looked at myself in the mirror, but didn't recognize myself. It was me, yes, but not the person I had dreamed of being. It was a domesticated version, the one who justified everything, the one who always had a better excuse than a result. And at that instant, I knew either I became someone new, or I would keep getting lost in the same promises I never kept. And I didn't want to get lost anymore. The transformation didn't begin with a written goal, nor with an inspiring conversation, not even with a moment of enlightenment. It began with a bitter and brutal decision to stop negotiating with my excuses. Because I understood that every time I listened to them, I gave them power. And every time I gave them power, I lost my own. I had turned my justifications into a personal religion, and like all religions, it offered me comfort, forgiveness, and meaning, but it also condemned me to repeat the same life over and over again. When I decided to become someone different, I didn't think of greatness. I thought of truth. What would I do if I no longer believed my own stories? What would happen if I didn't accept any reason that didn't come from commitment, from purpose, from duty to myself? How would I move if I could no longer say, "I'm tired," as permission to do nothing? Who would I be if I treated my dreams as unbreakable contracts, and not just pretty ideas that sound good when I share them? That was the turning point. It wasn't epic. It was silent. It was uncomfortable. It was an intimate and harsh conversation with myself. I spoke to myself as I never had before. I told myself the truths I avoided. I faced reality without embellishments. And I didn't do it to hurt myself. I did it to wake myself up, because excuses have a dangerous characteristic. They sound logical, but they rot you slowly. They don't strike you down suddenly. They gnaw at you from within, and the worst part is that you open the door to them. So I stopped opening it. I started listening to myself, but not obeying myself. I learned to distinguish between a real need and an elegant self-deception, because many times what I called needing to rest was simply fear of moving forward. "I'm not ready" was paralyzing perfectionism. "I'll start tomorrow" was disguised comfort. And the new me, the one that was just being born, couldn't be built from there. I adopted a simple rule. Every time an excuse appeared, I would cut through it with action, no matter how real it seemed. I would do what I said I would do, even if my hands trembled, even if the result was poor, even if I felt broken, because the act of fulfilling, even in pieces, is worth more than 1,000 justified excuses. It's in that uncomfortable repetition that the new mind is trained. And that mind doesn't reason from fear. It reasons from willpower, from real self-love, not from pity. At first, it hurt because every time I said, "I'll do it anyway," an old part of me died, a part that had fed for years on postponements, internal dramas, empty promises. It was like letting go of an imaginary friend who had been with me forever, but who, deep down, was silently ruining me. And I cried and doubted, but I didn't go back, because something changed when I started seeing small results. One day I fulfilled a habit. The next, I repeated it. Suddenly, there was a whole week without negotiating with my old mind, and then a month. It wasn't that I had no excuses. It was that they no longer made noise. I had reconfigured my identity. I was no longer someone who tried to change. I was someone who no longer allowed the reasons why I used to fail. And that changes everything. Because when you decide that your standards are more important than your emotional state, your life aligns. I learned that someone who respects themselves doesn't self-sabotage, that someone who is clear about their purpose doesn't allow themselves to justify the unjustifiable, that a broken promise to yourself is more damaging than any external criticism, and that you don't need strength to eliminate an excuse. You need decision. Strength comes later as a reward, but first, you must choose. Do you want temporary peace or lasting transformation? And I ask myself this question every day, because the old mind doesn't disappear. It whispers, it offers shortcuts, it proposes disguised pauses, but the new me doesn't argue with it. It just acts. Because I understood that excuses are not fought with arguments. They are overcome with deeds. And when deeds accumulate, they transform you, not from theory, but from the intimate pride of knowing that you are no longer a slave to what once dominated you. What used to be a daily struggle is now a lifestyle. Not perfect, not brilliant, but authentic. And you can do the same. You can decide today that you will no longer negotiate with yourself, that your word has value, that every time you say, I will do this, you will fulfill it as if it were a sacred pact. And if you fail, you will try again without excuses. Because every time you do, you are killing your old self with dignity and building a new one with character. And as I once read in a book that touched my soul, life pays you what you pay yourself. If you treat yourself as someone who always justifies themselves, you will receive a life that always justifies itself. But if you treat yourself as someone who delivers, even in silence, life will respond with exactness. Not by magic, but by vibrational integrity, because the universe doesn't reward the most talented. It rewards the most consistent. You don't need motivation. You need to see yourself differently. See yourself as that person who no longer makes deals with internal mediocrity. That person who gets up without justifying the dream, who acts without explaining the emotion, who delivers without waiting for validation. Because when you become someone who doesn't negotiate with excuses, you don't just change your mind, you change your reality. And there is nothing more powerful than that, because from there, everything else becomes possible. Everything. Underscore. Continue your transformation. If this resonated with you, don't leave it here. On the Chronicle of Knowledge channel, you'll find a complete playlist to follow this process step by step. Each chapter is designed to break one more excuse, to bring you a little closer to the you deserve to be. You're not alone, but you are responsible. Click, listen, and keep moving forward. Your transformation has only just begun.